Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. Today we're on the estate planning of the rich and famous topic, and today's episode is on the iconic Audrey Hepburn. She's the kind that certainly does not need a description of who she is, but maybe for some of our young listeners, if you don't know the name, you should, and you need to pause this episode, Google her name, or maybe ask your parents or grandparents or something. Anyway, before we dive into what happened estate-wise following her passing, let's talk a little bit about Audrey as a person first. According to her Wikipedia page, Audrey was, quote, a British actress and humanitarian and is recognized as both a film and fashion icon, end quote. Like the Breakfast at Tiffany's opening dress that Audrey is wearing. That black dress with her slicked back hair, her pearl necklace, that long cigarette holder. I mean, you can't walk around on Halloween without seeing someone dressed up like Audrey in her little black dress outfit. And actually a little bit more on that black dress later, so just hold tight for me. So let's dive in talking about Audrey as a person. According to biography.com, Audrey was born in Brussels, Belgium in 1929. When World War II broke out in 1939, Audrey's mother moved Audrey to the Netherlands, hoping that the country would be neutral. However, in 1940, Germany invaded Netherlands, and Audrey, along with her family, was significantly affected by the war. And, like, her uncle was killed. Her and her family really became quite malnourished. Audrey actually escaped out of the Second World War, but did so by developing a blood disorder and respiratory issues directly due to the malnutrition. After the war ended in 1945, Audrey and her mother and siblings moved to Amsterdam. And it was around then that Audrey made her debut in film. That was the film One Wild Oat. At the young age of 22, she went to New York to be featured on the Broadway show Gigi. That was when she really started to gain traction in her acting career. 2 years after her role in Gigi, she starred in the film Roman Holiday. According to biography.com, that is when she, quote, took the world by storm. Shortly after Roman Holiday, she starred in the Broadway show and started in another Broadway show where she met and ended up marrying an actor by the name of Mel Ferrer. They got married in Switzerland in 1954. A handful of years later, and after starring in a few big-name films, her and Mel had a child named Sean. And another handful of years later, mainly in like 1967, 1968-ish, Mel and Audrey actually separated and ended up divorcing. But in 1969, she ended up marrying another gentleman by the name of Andrea Dottie, and the following year, 1970, Andrea and Audrey had a child named Luca. However, 12 years later, Andrea and Audrey separated and divorced. After her acting career came to a close, and after so many starring roles and earning lots of awards, Audrey's focus really shifted to humanitarian work. According to biography.com, she became a goodwill ambassador for UNICEF in the late 1980s. Making more than 50 trips, Hepburn visited several projects in Asia, Africa, and Central and South America. Sadly, Audrey began battling colon cancer and ultimately died on January 20th, 1993 in Switzerland. She was 63 years old at the time of her passing. Following her death, an estate plan, if that's what we want to call it, was located. She had written her own will, and boy, did her estate pay big time for that poor decision. By the way, in case you care to know, according to Celebrity Net Worth, Audrey's estate was worth around $55 million. According to a blog by the law offices of DuPont and Blumenstiel, Audrey, like I said, had written her will, and in the will it said Sean and Luca, her two sons, were 50-50 beneficiaries of her estate. Instead of being nice and specific, she too simplistically gave the two sons authority to work out who got what of her possessions. As the blog states, she did so, quote, presumably relying on her sons to be able to come to an amicable agreement, end quote. And even for my clients, I often share that they can be specific about personal property, personal possessions, if they want. But considering it was Audrey Hepburn and her stuff was uber valuable, that would have been absolutely critical. So, of course, an amicable agreement did not take place, and ultimately they had to get the court involved to have a judge decide who gets what. What would be the last thing Audrey would have wanted to happen? To make her sons have to spend time, effort, energy, and cleaning up her lack of estate planning. Like so many of my clients say, she probably thought, oh, they'll be fine, they'll be able to work it out. Famous last words, I tell you. I say that because when you look up what happened to, like if you happen to Google, Audrey Hepburn estate after she passed away, basically everything, this entire argument is regarding her possessions. According to the Daily Mail, the boys finally settled the possessions dispute in 2015. Over 20 years after Audrey had passed away. That is crazy. The settlement sort of organized the possessions in the following manner. First, there was a group of items to be given to the auction house to be sold. Second, there was another group of items that the boys would keep. And third, the last group of items were things that the boys already had in their own possession. So for that first group, the items to be given to the auction house and sold, those items got auctioned off over the course of several years. And according to the Washington Times, Christie's auction made Audrey's estate a whopping $6.2 million that ultimately the boys split. You remember when I mentioned way at the beginning of the episode about her black dress and breakfast at Tiffany's? Well, that dress was one of the many items that got auctioned off. And it was sold for, are you ready? Over $900,000. Specifically, it was $920,909. That's a lot. On many websites, when I was doing my research, it said that Audrey's estate still has, quote, ongoing issues. And it really didn't go into much more, but I'm wondering if things still are not done here in 2022. And I'm sure that's not really the legacy Audrey had in mind for leaving her children. Though, speaking of legacy, her son Sean founded the Audrey Hepburn Children's Fund, and also UNICEF founded the Audrey Hepburn Society. And like I talked about earlier, she really did a lot of humanitarian work. So establishing these two organizations in her honor, I'm sure she would be so proud of. And actually, according to Celebrity Net Worth, the Audrey Hepburn Society, the one founded by UNICEF, quote, champions major donors and has raised nearly $100 million to date, end quote. That's so incredible. I always hope there's something to learn from these episodes that I do. And today, I think I'm going to talk about personal property distribution, like methods of distribution, because that's where Audrey slipped up here. Of course, this applies to people like you and I, too. Believe it or not, Most of us have something possession-wise that is somewhat valuable. Whether it's your jewelry, like a wedding ring, or tools, or guns, or vehicles, or antiques. Those things have a value. And you see, the hard thing about Audrey's estate plan, or lack thereof, is she said everything to her 2 boys in equal shares. But what does that even mean? What does equal shares mean? And granted, I'm a lawyer, so I dissect words, but does that mean equal number? Like quantity of items? Does that mean equal value? And then how do you even value something that sometimes feels difficult to value? Like Audrey's black dress and breakfast at Tiffany's. There's only one of those. So how the heck do you value that? Or another perfect example, and one I see all the time, are things like coins or antiques. I was just working on a little project for an estate case I'm involved in where someone passed away, and the gentleman that passed away had lots of coins. And when I say coins, I'm talking about silver dollars and half dollars and all these like unique coins. And because there's some disagreeing going on with this family, I'm thinking we're probably going to have to seek a professional appraisal of these coins. But valuing things like this is hard. You're sort of stuck with what would a willing and able buyer be willing to pay you for this thing. The deceased person almost always thinks it's worth a lot of money, right? But if there's not a buyer for that much, if another buyer is willing to give you, say, half, do you take it? So is that the value? It's hard, right? So when you think about this type of asset, personal property, personal possessions, how do you incorporate wishes in your estate plan? Well, there are 3 ways, so let's chat about them. First is the Audrey Hepburn style. This style is the, my beneficiaries can figure it out later style. Will they? Well, it will get figured out some way, somehow, whether it's by the beneficiaries or a judge, like in Audrey's case. And it sort of depends on how the beneficiaries, how they operate and how amicable they will stay. And unfortunately, we sometimes don't know whether they will stay amicable or not until it's too late. Second is you can also specifically designate items to people in a will or trust. If you have any specific items that you want to go to certain people, you can actually designate them in your will or trust. So say you put, hey, I want my wedding ring to go to fill in the blank, for example. The pro about this method, when we weigh kind of pros and cons, the pro about this method is it's nice and clean. It's inside your document, written black and white. The con is if you ever want to change it. You're probably having to amend your documents, which means you're going to have to pay a lawyer a fee to amend those documents. Third option on how to incorporate wishes, like in regards to personal property, into your estate plan is to designate items to people on, say, something like a memorandum of personal property. So you can have your will or trust specifically reference a freestanding document called a memorandum of personal property, which lists out items and who they should go to. And the pro is that it's easy to keep updated. It's this freestanding document, so it's easy to keep updated because all you have to do is update the memorandum rather than, redoing your will or trust. The con about this way is, what if something magically, wink, wink, happens to said memorandum? The attorney may have a copy of the memorandum, but what if the deceased person updated it and didn't provide us with an updated version? The con is just, there's a lot of room for funny business to occur. So as we wrap up this episode, my message to you is to lean on your estate planning attorney on how to tackle your personal property, your personal possessions. That's what we're here for, to guide you, to recommend best courses of action, whether that's about money or personal property, like the topic today. Okay, let's wrap this episode up. Next week, we're back to a cautionary tale episode where we talk about real life clients and real life cases. And during that episode, we're going to be talking about treading lightly when you take legal advice from non-lawyers, even when that person means well. And we're going to be talking about that next time, and it's going to be good. It's going to be very, very, I think, meaningful to hear. So we will dive into that next Tuesday, Legal Tea listeners. Until then, take care and be well.